Previously, he has co-founded Springboard, and for the past 4 years, he acted as an advisor to many multi-company accelerators, from Montreal to Moscow. The current managing director of London-based Techstars, co-founder of F6S and Tech.eu. Give a warm welcome to Jon Bradford.
Good afternoon. I have a button that's got a red mark here, so I can't mess it up badly. My name's Jon Bradford. I run Techstars in London, as well as doing multiple other things. For the last 5 years, I've worked in and around accelerators. So why am I having this conversation? One of two things. One is everybody's talking about there's an accelerator bubble. Part one, and part two, accelerators were built to disrupt angel investing, or support it actually. But nonetheless, what's happened over the last 10 years around accelerators, and so what happens next? Is everything in life, nothing remains static, so what is the next step, and what would you expect to see coming forward with accelerators? So Techstars was founded 8 years ago in a really small place called Boulder that everybody's heard of but never been. So to give you some context, Boulder is about 100,000 people. It's teeny, tiny, tiny, tiny. And essentially, it was designed by a bunch of angels who wanted to help support not just one team at a time, but multiple teams at a time. And it kind of worked miraculously. And as a result, 3 or 4 years later, it started to expand, and it got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and then it suddenly got a lot bigger. So over the for the first 3 years, it was one location, and then it grew to 3 and 5, and that's when Springboard merged with Techstars, just over 2 years ago. And at that point, from 2 years ago to today, we now actually have, my slides are wrong, because we keep getting bigger faster, is we now have 18 programs, of which almost a quarter of them now exist outside of the US, and about half of them we're working with corporates, and half of them we work with investors. We have now over 300 teams, actually not 300, about 500, and raised about $2 billion for the teams in that. So you can't see this, but it's written by Mike Butcher in 2011. And they were predicting the end of accelerators at that point. They were predicting it was going to melt down. There were too many accelerators. And it continued to grow. Today, there are now over 1,000 accelerators, of which there's suddenly a whole variety of them. People keep saying to me, so what is an accelerator? And I said, I used to know what an accelerator is, but I have no idea what it is today. Because everything seems to have like a badge which says, and we're now an accelerator as well. So what I've seen is there's a huge number of corporates that are getting involved around the subject matter. And there's a lot of people in the non-tech space which are getting involved. I've seen versions of the space travel accelerator coming soon. I've seen, what else? Nuclear power, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And I've now seen pre-accelerators as well as accelerators and post-accelerators. I was talking to a very large US firm this morning about creating a post-accelerator accelerator. What the hell that means, I have no idea. So one of the things I would argue is there's a lot of people that's talking about everything which is going on around startups today. And the concern is, are we right in the middle of a bubble, and is it going to be 2000, and are we all going to lose our shirts? But what's really interesting, I personally believe, is there's something fundamentally different about this time round than last time round. Last time round, there was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Investors were investing in startups, which were actually investing in other startups, or they're using other startups' products. So essentially, the whole system was historically fueled by venture capital funding. And as soon as that money stopped, suddenly the whole system slowed down and stopped itself. What's really interesting today is startups are actually being impactful completely across the board. And actually, as I have a very good friend of mine who I looked at the pitch deck last week, and it got to the customer slide. And one of the VCs that saw the customer slide said, "This is incredible." And he said, "What's incredible about it?" He said, "I don't recognize any of these customers. They're businesses which exist far away from the valley, and they have nothing to do with technology. Like, they're real businesses. They are real customers." And what's different this time is, actually, whilst it's growing and there's a lot of noise, actually it's being impactful far beyond the tech space. It's actually not being completely centric around those things. But with accelerators, we started in a place which was all about web technology. Actually, it was all about B2C. But that's now grown. You now actually see these accelerators touching on lots of different things. Inside all of our programs now today, at least a third of the teams have some hardware component. It's not just software. I actually had a knitting machine that was wired up to the internet, which is probably one of the most exciting startups I've seen in the last 12 months, which is completely insane. It's a 3D printer for clothes. So this is what I think venture capitals look like for the last 20 years. It's really slow, and they spend their lives fucking each other, yeah? But essentially, the point being is we, as accelerators, have criticized VCs about how slow they are and how slow they are to adapt. And actually, one of the things I actually challenge accelerators is the model that you have today is not probably the right model for tomorrow. And actually, what you really need to start thinking about is what sort of businesses are you going to get involved in, and what sort of startups are you going to help support. Half of the teams which come into Techstars in London are already seed funded. Half of the teams that I work with are repeat entrepreneurs who have built and sold businesses before. Everything is being challenged. Everything that you thought an accelerator was is probably going to be different tomorrow. And so one of the things that I spend my life doing is thinking about what will tomorrow look like. And actually, as a result, all of those statements I made about there's too many accelerators is probably going to come true. I think that actually those that pretend and continue to do the things they do today, in 2 or 3 years' time will not exist. I think we are going to start seeing over the next 2 or 3 years, accelerators which sort of exist and are sort of interesting will suddenly just not happen. 1 year they'll be there and 1 year they're not. And I think what you'll end up with is what I call 2 tiers. One which are people who are super serious about really adding value and supporting the teams that participate, and those that are okay. The key is, are accelerators really for the benefit of the startups, or are they for the benefit of the investors or the corporates, or is it government money or EU funding? And the more that you want to be impactful around your startup, the more you have to take references and think about the accelerators that you may or may not want to take part in. What I'm starting to see is it's really, really, really hard to make money in accelerators. I know that because I've done it for the last 5 years. You really need to find the best teams. And not only do you have to find the best teams, but you also have the capacity to continue to follow on investing afterwards. If you don't have the follow-on capacity, you're probably never going to make enough money to create a long-term sustainable platform for that accelerator. And we've seen that with Techstars. So Techstars, Y Combinator, both invest over $100,000 in every startup which participates. Techstars now has a venture fund, which is $150 million to continue to support the best teams after the program. Here in Bulgaria, 11, disclosure point, I'm a partner. actually have a similar capacity, not just to invest small amounts, but to continue to invest far beyond that itself. And so what you'll need to think about is, who are the people who've got your back? Are they going to be there in 2 years' time? Because being in a startup, as you showed earlier, is a long and tortuous journey. It's not about 90 days, it's about 5 or 7 years or even 10 years. That's the struggle, and who are the people who are going to cover you? And so what do I think is going to happen next? This is essentially about not what's happening today, it's about what is going to happen tomorrow. So how are people who run accelerators, how are they going to make themselves sustainable? How do you know the person that you're sitting opposite is going to be there in 5 years' time? And so there's different various options. Some of them may go and raise your own fund to support the teams that have come through your accelerator. Sometimes it might be thinking about, how do you sell the rights to your options? Because the best teams will go on and grow and succeed. And actually getting invested into those teams is really hard. But you have the option right to actually invest. So being able to transfer that right to somebody else, I think, is really interesting. I think the idea that VCs actually constantly want to invest in seed rounds and below, but one of the things they struggle with is they really shouldn't be there because they're Series A and above. So there's this interesting dynamic that VCs sometimes want to be seed and sometimes they want to be Series A. And with seed, maybe the accelerator represents an easy way of doing that. A really good example I've seen of this is Foundry Group in the US, who's a Series A and above fund. They invest $300 million. But what they've actually done is they've set up a syndicate model. So they invest in over 50 businesses a year as angel investors through AngelList Syndicate, as a way to get to that lower tier without necessarily having to spend lots and lots of time and energy. Or maybe ultimately it's going to be, I've put VCs, it could be corporates. The thing about corporates is you've got to make sure that if you're going to a corporate accelerator, you're doing it for your benefit and you're not going to get screwed by the corporate. There are good corporate programs and there are terrible corporate programs. So, as with startups, was with the case that accelerators once became very disruptive 10 years ago and changed the face of what early stage being a startup was, I personally believe that accelerators need to look to tomorrow as well and think about how they survive what can potentially be a bloody nightmare for the next 3 or 4 years. Thank you.